I Want to Jump Like Dee Dee, with me, Giles Sibbald, is the music podcast that does music a bit differently. I'm talking to some incredible musicians, DJs and producers about how they use an experimental mindset to fuel their own creativity, pursue new challenges, overcome fears, bounce back from mistakes. So today we're up to Manchester, one of the really great music cities of the world, and somebody who cut his teeth as a DJ at Hacienda and has since become, for me, one of the great cultural and social authorities. Alongside his work and researcher as a researcher and a presenter, he's written several top-class books, including a real essential read, Life After Dark: History of British Nightclubs and Music Venues, especially since the kind of direct and indirect attacks on nightlife culture right now. And a limited edition beautiful series called Art Decades, which is a series of mini books covering his record collection, Courtney Love, Keith Haring, and latterly Sylvia Plath. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Dave Haslam to the show, and thanks very much for coming on, Dave.
No problem. Good to be
Brilliant.
here.
Thank you. So Manchester has been such a massive part of your life, and it's strange to think. I think you arrived sort of early 80s, or maybe 1980.
1980, yeah.
1980, yeah. So and that sort of time, sort of very 81. I was 81. I was sort of 12, 13, and I was brought up in Chorley. And it's weird to think that you were arriving there, and I was, kind of finding my identity, sort of taking the train over from Chorley over to Manchester, Victoria, and sort of discovering this this city, which at kind of 12 years old was it was a real kind of eye opener. But for me, it was an amazing experience, and I've got such an affinity for the place. How did you find Manchester when you arrived?
Well, I moved to Manchester from Birmingham. I mean, there's I think probably the differences between cities of that kind probably slightly over exaggerated. I think there was a lot of similarity, both obviously in that period.
Yeah.
Post-industrial cities, cities that had glory days and, full employment and lots of beautiful Victorian buildings. But, through the 70s had a pretty hard time. And also cities that had, at that time, especially, a lot going on in the music scenes.
Yeah.
I mean, Birmingham at that time, they don't kind of shout about it like Manchester does. But if you think, if you kind of start off with Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin at the beginning of the 70s, and then, by the end of the 70s, you've got Steel Pulse, Dexys Midnight Runners, the Au Pairs, beginnings of Duran Duran. There was a lot happening in the city. So, Manchester, I think going from Birmingham to Manchester was probably less of a culture shock than going from Chorley to Manchester, in the sense that you were going, to big regional cities, that had similar good things and not so good things about them. But I think the thing that I remember most is that I'd built up in my head, I think, the idea that because I was such a music fan, and I was a John Peel listener.
Yeah.
And I'd built up in my head this idea that because I was a Joy Division fan, Factory Records fan, The Fall magazine, Buzzcocks, we know them all now. And I kind of, in my head, I thought I would arrive in Manchester and these people would be fated as great, as great stars, and Pete Shelley would be, carried down Oxford Road on it. They'd all, but I arrived and I realized that actually that scene, if you can call it that kind of post-punk, it wasn't called that then, new wave, indie music, it wasn't called that either, but that little world that is now talked about as legendary, and quite rightly in many ways, it was tiny. It was so tiny compared to the mass of Manchester. And I always, I kind of think that, more people were into Dire Straits in Manchester than all those factory bands and Magazine and the Fall and the Buzzcocks and Ludus and all that. So I was kind of surprised that I could, and that actually meant it was quite accessible. So I remember, you know, really early on, October 1980, I'd been in the city 3 weeks, and I was at a venue called The Squat, and New Order were playing in front of 45 people. It was a semi-secret gig, you know, it was one of their first after Joy Division. And yeah, but in my head, I thought, you know, that it would be just, you know, incredibly buzzing. It would be like San Francisco or Carnaby Street or all these other things. And it was just wonderfully ordinary and endearing, and small.
I mean, like for you, you know, curiosity and that sort of sense of adventure or you know, kind of finding new things has been a big part of you. It's kind of like, you know, it is you. Where did that sort of come from? Because I mean, you know, going to a sort of city and then it's kind of ordinary on the outside. I mean, that must have been really kind of exciting. Where did this sort of mindset come from?
I mean, curiosity is a good word. I do look back on the young me and realise that was very much a part of my personality, and also restlessness, I think. And yeah, but I was curious. I think from an early age, I remember also being drawn to things that were out of the ordinary. You know, instinctively, I remember, for example, watching Top of the Pops in the 70s with my big sister. And the records that I liked, and she liked, to be honest, the records that we liked, they were never number one. You know, they were kind of maybe, you know, top 10 occasionally. And I always kind of wondered why that was, you know, why instinctively I was drawn to things that were a bit weird and marginal. And then when I got a bit older and I heard even more music on Peel, I realized that, you know, a lot of the great music I liked and made an impact on me instinctively wasn't even in the top 20, wasn't anywhere near Top of the Pops. There were these alternative worlds. And, you know, I was drawn to those alternative worlds in music, film, you know, books. Just me. I mean, it wasn't, you know, it wasn't like I was kind of being intentionally weird or anti-mainstream in some snobby way. It was just genuinely, that's the kind of stuff that was connected with me. And but it intrigued me. So that's when my kind of curiosity came in. I was like, well, you know, how does this all work? And I think also from an early age, I remember being interested in the mechanics of things. What I mean by that is I remember, you know, going to see Blondie, for example.
That was your first gig, wasn't it? Was it
one of my first gigs?
One of your first ones, yeah. And
as well as just, you know, the pure enjoyment of being 16 and there's Debbie Harry a few yards away, you know, and the excitement of what was going on.
Yeah.
I remember kind of trying to, as well as that, and it didn't diminish that visceral impact at all, but as well as that, trying to work out, well, who is Deb? Where's she come from? Where's that world?
Yeah.
You know, and discovering, in fact, through Blondie, which is a very, you know, in some ways quite a mainstream act, discovering through her CBGB's, Talking Heads television, and then back to Patti Smith, you know, the Velvet Underground, Andy Warhol. So, and also I remember even thinking, looking around at the audience and thinking where they come from and how does all this work? It's hard to explain, but I was never a passive consumer of. I was always interested in how it was working, and I guess also then became keen on being a part of it and participant, and a contributor to those alternative worlds. And they lent themselves very much to being a participant. I mean, that was what that moment in music was all about. Kind of do it yourself, get involved.
It's strange where the you know, where these sort of influences come from. I mean, I remember that you know, when I you know, sort of growing up in Chorley, and sort of there were a few, you know, a handful of record shops, you know, non-main, just independent record shops. I mean, handful, probably 3. But just the excitement of going in, you know, into this sort of dark place and sort of rooting through and finding, you know, kind of record covers by, you know, kind of like sort of Susie and the Banshees and Killing Joke and early Adam and the Ants and things like that were really just kind of so exciting. And I don't know where mine came from, because my parents were, you know, very kind of traditional. You know, my dad was classically trained, and that's how I kind of grew up. But there was this other world that just really kind of excited me.
For me, that was really exciting. And yeah, so that I think that's kind of where it all started. It was never about being interested in that weird marginal stuff as in any way as a kind of in and of itself. You know, I was never kind of impressed by, you know, overtly, consciously weird.
Yeah,
kind of always thought that looked a bit fake. I just kind of, but it was just what I was, luckily enough, you know, in Birmingham and then in Manchester, that I was in cities where that kind of underground stuff was happening.
Yeah, and then you kind of like made the shift, the brave shift, I would call it, to from a consumer to, you know, kind of producing, you know, producing the, you know, the kind of the music, the content and things like that. How did you, was it just again a kind of instinctive thing that you felt right?
It was pretty much instinctive, yeah. I mean, my first, you know, my first whatever, let's call it cultural intervention, was fanzine, you know, and I started the fanzine, you know, at the end of 1983.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Debris, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I mean, I didn't have any allies. I didn't have, well, I didn't even have many friends, to be honest. But I kind of felt part of that little community that I described before, you know. And there was a fanzine in Manchester called City Fun, and that used to be sold at gigs and again at kind of slightly out of the way alternative places like Grassroots Bookshop and On the Eighth Day. And so I got used to picking up City Fun, and I think that was kind of my only real role model. But I was aware of kind of punk fanzines, but I didn't want it to be like that. And again, you know, looking back over time at how my brain was working at that point and my creative impulse, I realized that the last thing I wanted to do was to create a fanzine in the model or in the shadow of anything else.
Yeah.
That would just never, I didn't want to imitate anyone else. I wanted it to be a very, very honest reflection of what I was as a person. I wanted to share, in the fanzine I shared music, but also ideas and books, and it was, yeah, just me sharing stuff with the world.
Do you think that you got that with Debris? That you kind of got over that? Got over that message that this is different.
Well,
this is me.
I mean, I did, because I mean, it sounds a bit odd, but I remember being at a gig, and I went into the toilets and for a piss, and somebody had written on the wall, "Debris equals pretentious shit or arty shit." I can't remember. And I was kind of taken aback by that, obviously, because I was sensitive young man. But at the same time, I kind of thought, well, I've made an impact. I would much rather be arty or pretentious. Again, not because I felt like it was necessarily a badge I wanted to wear, but if anyone was going to insult anything that I did by calling it arty or pretentious. I was happy with that because I thought, well, you know, Howard Devoto from, you know, Buzzcocks and then Magazine, you know, he'd write songs inspired by Dostoevsky. Ian Curtis would read William Burroughs and J.G. Ballard. You know, Tony Wilson, he was on the telly, he was pretentious. And I kind of thought, maybe that's just what people who aren't curious and aren't interested in adventure, or maybe even looking back, even people who are a bit intimidated or scared by that kind of world, that's their reaction. And I'd rather be that than mundane. And I think that early review of my first cultural intervention kind of set the scene, really. And I kind of, from that moment on, I just kind of embraced it, really. You know, and around the same time I started DJing, and, you know, once again, there were other DJs in town. And my rationale behind getting involved in that was because there was music I wanted to play which other DJs weren't playing. You know, and that is still, I mean, you know, I mean, I could talk forever about DJing, but I think the one thing about DJing that I really hold on to is that I believe when you go to hear a DJ, you should really get a sense of that person's personality. And also you should know that what they're playing or the way they're playing what they're playing is different to anyone else. You know, you've got, you know, later on in the 1990s, there were DJs. I was involved in clubs and I would book guest DJs and I'd book young DJs. And, you know, young DJs would give me a cassette of, you know, of what they were doing in the hope I'd get them a gig. You know, 19 out of 20 of them would basically play what Pete Tong was playing.
Yeah.
So it was the 1 out of 20 that wasn't would get the gig. There was nothing wrong with the music, but it was just, why, you know, why get up in the morning to do something that someone else is doing better than you?
Yeah.
And so, you know, by the mid 80s, I think my attitudes to creative activity were pretty much set, and they're pretty much as they are now.
Yeah. And did you like with the, I mean, obviously, you know, like a fanzine, you know, is DIY. You kind of, you know, and that, I guess, you know, kind of gives you a certain kind of mindset, you know, and again, I'm sort of thinking about an experimental mindset that you know, that kind of, you have to think on your feet, you have to think about what you're doing. And I guess a similar kind of thing with DJing. Did you get the chance to experiment, you know, when you first started DJing with, you know, kind of like how you're putting stuff together and the type of music that people are reacting to?
No, I mean, I was just thrown in at the deep end, really. I mean, I started out DJing in a very small club in Manchester called the Man Alive. I was working with a band called Big Flame, who were putting on.
I remember them. Yeah.
They were putting on again, pretty unknown John Peel type band.
Yeah.
In this little club, and the band's equipment would cover half the dance floor. And then after the bands played, I just kind of played music, you know. And so I had half a very small dance floor to fill. So it wasn't actually that. It was perfect, really, because I didn't have to worry too much about, you know, the big tunes, you know, because I only needed 8 people to be dancing.
Yeah.
It was full. And that was, yeah, so inadvertently, that was a great way to learn. And then occasionally there would be no band. So the other guys would say, well, just you play all night, you know. You play, and they'd sometimes have to lend me records because I didn't even have enough records to play at that point. And so I just played my favorite music of that moment, you know, and I learned I learned how to play them in the right order, basically.
What was your sort of feeling when you came off that first DJ set? Can you remember how you felt?
I can't really. I think again, I think the way that I've reacted to DJing is pretty much the same from when I can remember, you know, which is probably a little bit later on.
Yeah.
Where I'm quite self-critical. I think that's obviously a really important part of being any kind of a creative person.
Yeah.
To be, you know, aware of what you do well, and also honest with yourself about, you know, when you let yourself down. And there's been many times when at the end of a night DJing, people have come up to me and done the usual, you know, that was amazing, Dave. That was, you're my favorite DJ, you know.
Yeah.
And in my head, I'm giving myself 7 out of 10.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that they're wrong, and I'm not saying they're deluded or they're necessarily high on drugs. I'm just saying that that the way that a creative person views their own product is a lot different to how the audience does. And you have to, it kind of keeps you sharp, you know, keeps you hungry, but there's always, I mean, I think it's the same with live events I've done when I've done live in conversations with people.
Yeah.
You know, I kind of, I'm still buzzing and I'm still happy, and there's still kind of, you know, I've enjoyed the experience. And I'm, you know, I'm kind of filled with joy, but at the same time, there's a part of me that's a bit dissatisfied.
Yeah.
Why did I play that? Or
why did I do that? Yeah.
Or, you know, and again with interviews, you know, occasionally just almost being tortured by missing a moment or getting you know. And I think if I'm honest, there was a time, I think it was I'll have to look it up. I think it was about 2011, 2012. I interviewed Nile Rodgers.
Yeah.
And it was before kind of Chic had come back into, and Nile had come back into public consciousness in the way that he did quite soon after.
Yeah.
And you know, there was a good audience, and I mean, I'd done all my research like I always do, and I absolutely worshipped the guy. I can still remember first hearing Le Freak, being absolutely blown away by it. And I knew, you know, he'd worked with Bowie and Diana Ross. I knew he'd done all these things, and Madonna. So I was in awe of him. And we started the interview, and he's very used to being interviewed. So he was kind of just going a lot through the motions, but it was default Nile.
Yeah.
And then there was a moment when he mentioned an act he'd been in the early 70s. And he talked about their single. And I actually remembered the name of the producer. I said, oh yeah, produced by. And he was like, oh. And at that moment, he kind of switched, and he kind of thought, okay, this is different. This is the level.
Yeah.
And he just gave me so much. And then he said, I'll get my guitar and I'll talk you through some of these songs. You just tell me what song. I'll tell you, talk about how I composed, how I came, and let's dance, you know. And
wow.
He's the greatest dancer in front of 150 people.
Wow.
And I was sat there having surmounted that little obstacle of not being able to quite feel like Niall was being open and in the moment. Yeah. And I knew he was open in the moment. I knew he was enjoying what he was doing. I knew the audience had a once in a lifetime experience. And there was Niall talking about writing He's the Greatest Dancer. And and what he talked to Bowie about during the production of Let's Dance.
Wow.
And at that moment, my whole body was kind of flooded with just absolute bliss. And I realized that it was at that moment that I was exactly where I wanted to be. And the job I was doing was perfect.
Yeah.
The response I was getting was ideal.
Yeah.
And I realized that I was right up until that point to keep giving myself 7 out of 10, because I suddenly realized what 10 out of 10
what that looked like.
And it was incredible. You know, I mean, it's maybe happened once, twice since then. But, you know, and I realized then that's why deep down there's that, you know, give me another chance. That's the great thing with DJing. You get another chance the following week.
Yeah.
And you know, keep on writing and you keep on getting better. And then you get that 10 out of 10. And this is why I'm on God's earth. And it took that moment for me to understand that.
I mean, that story is, like, for me, is just a sort of fabulous example of, you know, kind of like the power of human connection. You know, how you can, you know, just by, you know, doing your research, you know, sort of, you know, working out, you know, kind of what the guy's about, and then sort of showing that, and then that takes it just to a different level, and that then just leads to all sorts. That can just open up. It's like you said, you know, you said, okay, this guy knows what he's talking about. You know, he's interested. You show that, and that kind of shows something that's very, very powerful.
Yeah, and I think it's that, human to human connection. And in a live interview, when it's live on stage in front of an audience, and you can feel that chemistry and you can feel that moment. I mean, that's what, it's the same as anything that happens on stage, I guess, that moment where you feel kind of connection. In that way, it's the audience connected with what's on stage, but when you're DJing, it's often the audience amongst themselves. The DJ, you kind of realize that you're enabling connection.
Yeah.
It's really always about you connecting with the crowd. It's often about, are you creating the conditions where the crowd will connect amongst themselves and come together as a collective?
Yeah.
And that's the important relationship in DJing. It's not the same as the artist and the audience. It's the audiences and their interactions, which is the key thing. Yeah,
I guess you know, kind of authenticity as well is you know, is a really, I mean, it's a word that we hear a lot, you know, today, and I wonder if, you know, authenticity is a real kind of way to, you know, people are looking for lots of ways to differentiate themselves. You know, how can I be different? And to me, sometimes it feels like they're trying to be different just for the sake of it. Without that kind of authenticity, and it's a hard thing to, you know, to have. You know, I wonder if authenticity sort of comes with, is related to people finding their identity.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, obviously we're all individuals, okay? So, and therefore I think in honest creative endeavor, idiosyncrasy has to happen.
Yeah.
Because whatever you're expressing, if you're being honest, and you're really expressing what's deep inside, you're expressing aspects of your individuality in an idiosyncratic way. And that's really where you're being authentic, you're being honest. Obviously, you know, we're similar to each other as well. That's how connections and communication can happen.
Yeah.
But actually what's important is that singularity. And obviously a fanzine is a great way to start, because actually a fanzine people pick up and they know it's more or less the product of one person's imagination. And it's not supposed to be anything else. You know, it's not supposed to be the enemy or the face. It's one person talking to the reader. And so in a way you're expected to be individual and singular, and that's fine. What's odder then is how you take that into the bigger world, where there's more commercial pressures, you know, and that's where a little bit of bravery comes in, because you're, as I say, you're expressing yourself. So you're putting yourself on the line. I'm lucky I can't fake stuff. Okay, so I can't fake an interest in, I can't play a record I don't like. I can't write about somebody who bores me, you know? I like being inspired and I like being passionate, and it doesn't work for me. So, so that kind of singular idiosyncratic expression is fine. I'm really happy with that. And to me, but you do have to be brave, because, you know, when you're young, when you're young, when I mean young, I mean kind of up to kind of mid-20s or a little bit beyond, maybe.
Yeah.
You can be reckless. If you're not reckless, well, what's wrong with you, you know? You could be reckless, you could be irresponsible, you must be, in fact. There's a duty and a responsibility for you to just, like, you know, hoover up experience and do stuff, adventure. And like you say, find your identity, you know, don't settle down. But what's harder then is when that wish to communicate and be active in a creative world, and to be adventurous, and to be idiosyncratic and singular, and you realize that's taking a risk, because it might well, given the world that we live in, it might well come at a point when you might have responsibilities. You know, you might have to pay the rent or the mortgage, or you might have to, you know, you realize that you can't get by on, you know, just in an alternative world where, you know, you don't have to worry about money or bills, or, you know, you start bringing up a family. And at that point, it's, you know, you begin to be more aware of how your practice is affected by the need to be on some level commercial, because you need to get paid.
You need to get paid. Yeah.
If I'm filling a dance floor with 8 people listening to 23 Skidoo records, and alive, that's great. That's not gonna, I'm not going to earn a living doing that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And if I have to get a proper job, which I guess I might have done at one point, but I never did, then I wouldn't have the opportunity to do that. So I'm like, okay, well, this is my world. I've got to make it work now.
Yeah. So that gives you that kind of focus, doesn't it? It's almost like like you say, I have to make this work.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, that question of, you know, uniqueness and the, you know, and the self, and putting yourself out there is, I mean, I found that incredibly difficult when I was young. You know, I in a way, you know, sort of in the shadow of, like, my parents to an extent, and it was just sort of hard to sometimes kind of break out of that. And I feel, you know, quite a lot of people do feel that as well. And there's an immense amount of pressure on, particularly sort of younger people these days. Probably social media has impacted it. To
is the word conform.
Conform.
I mean, I think that is that's a really, it's a really unhealthy pressure that we put on kids. And in a healthy society, as you say, we kind of go from thinking that we have to conform to our parents' world, and maybe they think you have to as well. So it kind of works both ways. Society wants you to conform. You don't want to, you know, so it's not just about you as a person and yourself. It's also about how people react to you as you grow up.
Yeah.
You're not given the space or the opportunity to feel like you can actually find your authentic individual self.
Yeah.
Instead, you have to pick an identity off the shelf, you know?
Yeah.
But then weirdly, what then happens is that people kind of maybe then rebel into another kind of conformity, you know, where they're like, okay, well, you know, I'm going to reject everything that my, you know, my parents say and everything the teachers say. I'm a real rebel.
Yeah.
And actually what they conform into is something pretty much equally secondhand. And, I'm kind of aware of that, because there'll be people who will be like, oh, this is what I'm into.
Yeah.
Like for example, yeah, I mean, there's lots of examples, but that's where kind of music and youth culture tribalism comes on. People's like, oh, I've found a tribe.
Yeah.
And that's great in some ways, but then don't limit yourself. You know what I mean? If you're and in a way, that's again, I mean, again, my analogy comes back to, I guess, the DJing. If I feel like there was moments, say in the Hacienda in the late 80s, where I realized there was safer records to play.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to play them. So if I had, if there were, the audience was what you might now call indie, I'd start playing hip hop.
Brilliant.
No, seriously, because I was like, well, why? I can hold all that in my mind. These records can mean something to me. It's not an either or. It's not a binary. It's not a, and that's and I can remember just actually quite gleefully like thinking, right, this'll test them,
Yeah.
And the thing is, though, so where so in a way that's brave still, but I kind of, what I thought in that moment was, if I can cultivate and nurture an appreciative audience who will go with me on the whole journey, who won't preconceive, who won't be limited, then actually in the long run, that's what I want. So that's kind of where the commercial thing comes in, where I'm thinking, okay, well, in the big wide world, this is uncommercial.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter about appeal. Don't need to appeal to everyone.
Yeah.
Try and appeal to everyone. In a way,
it's impossible to do.
It's impossible, yeah. And also, I mean, I kind of feel this particularly now, where I am now, is that over the years, I've never been that interested in widening my audience. I've always been more interested in deepening my connection to that audience.
Yeah.
So for me, going out on a limb and playing something a bit odd when I'm DJing, or when I wrote Manchester, England, back in the end of the 90s, I remember some of the reaction, a lot of the reaction was very, very positive. But some of the reaction was like, why are the first 3 chapters about Victorian Manchester? Why do I have to wait till chapter 5 before write about Bez taking ecstasy?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I don't know. I just wanted to paint a bigger context. I thought by the time you come to Bez and the Hacienda and a guy called Gerald and Factory Records, you've got a sense of where they are in history and how they happened and the roots of all that.
Yeah.
But some people don't want that. Some people didn't get that. But for me, that was how I wanted to do it. And I thought, actually, I'm not really taking a risk, because somewhere deep down I'm thinking there are other people who
totally. I completely agree.
Some people will get it, some people won't.
Yeah.
How it is. And when you're a DJ, again, that's the analogy, but it's the same for writing and it's the same for everything that I've been involved with, really. When you're DJing, you accept there are some people in the room who are not going to like your music.
I guess like
or not even going to like you. And if they don't like your music, they kind of then don't like you.
Don't like you as a person. Yeah, they've never met you.
They take it very personally that you won't play what they want to hear. And it becomes a kind of and occasionally they'll come up to you, and they are affronted that you won't play the music they want to hear, and they do take it very personally. But there's nothing I can do.
Yeah, I guess that, I mean, like kind of life, a lot of like, kind of business, for example, the default is, you know, how big you can grow. You know, it's like, okay, well, what's the next step to kind of scale this business and kind of grow? And that's almost like the sort of the default that we have in this world. And, you know, there's not as much attention paid to, like you said, you know, kind of deepening the relationships that, like in a business sense, that you have with your existing clients, like you would have with your audience and with your, you know, your readers, for the, you know, sort of through your books.
Yeah.
There will be people who don't like your books, but you've got a great audience there that wants to read more and will devour more that you write. There's a guy in whose book I read he lives in Vancouver, and he's written a book called The Company of One. His name's Paul Jarvis, and his is about, you know, how he runs his business. He doesn't want to grow. He just wants to run his business at a certain size, to a size that suits him for what he wants from his life, and it's just a great way of sort of looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, and there are enough. Luckily, there are enough times when that kind of approach has really been appreciated by people. I mean, again, I remember when I was doing my. I remember all these little moments that kind of validate, you know, my my cultural practice or whatever. There was one time when I was doing my fanzine and I wrote about Raymond Carver, short story writer.
Yeah.
And I mean, now he's a kind of, I mean, he died in 1988. He's now a legend. But I met him a couple of times and wrote a long interview with him. In amongst, you know, but the fanzine would sell at gigs. You know, so people would pick it up. There's an interview with Terry Hall or Maynard Cherry. And then there's these 3 pages about Raymond Carver. And I remember a guy coming to the DJ box at the Hacienda to buy the latest issue. He had a look and he was like, "Who's this Raymond Carver?" And I'm like, "Oh, American short story writer." He was like, you know, a bit dismissive, but he gave me 40p, bought the fanzine. I didn't see him for a few weeks. He came back and he said, "I've got a present for you." And he gave me a T-shirt with, and on it he'd had printed the front cover of the Raymond Carver collection of short stories I've been writing about. He said, "It was such an interesting interview. I bought the book. It's amazing. Thank you." Wow, that's incredible. And I still have the T-shirt, and so you know that those
you can't put a price on that.
No, I mean those moments are what keep on energizing you, and this happened 35 years ago. But it's still something that makes me think, how brilliant, how perfect, you know.
With your book Life After Dark, sort of talking about, you know, kind of nightlife, you know, the richness, the diversity, the kind of energy that, you know, sort of comes out of that book, you know, kind of, you know, writing and reading about the nightlife over the years, absolutely sort of phenomenal. And now it's kind of it's under attack. You know, it's irrespective of COVID, you know, there's been kind of attacks on the sort of the cultural. I mean, the impact that this possibly sort of has on particularly kind of younger people, you know, in term, I mean, just, you know, for identity purposes perhaps as well, you know, and them finding themselves is kind of huge. I'd say.
I mean, and obviously places to play, you know, places to serve your apprenticeship as a DJ in a band, and, you know, it's such an important part of our ecosystem and our infrastructure in our culture. And you know, as the Keith Haring book in my series talks about, you know, the clubs in the early 80s, end of the 70s, early 80s in New York. And you know, it's something that's been replicated enough times, I think, since in lots of cities where you know, the 4 walls of a venue will attract interested and interesting people, and they're not necessarily, their relationship won't necessarily be even about music. Often it's an artistic one, They meet allies, collaborators, lovers, you know, and so where else do you have that kind of a space in a town or a city? You know, it's not, you know, in the Arndale shopping centre. You know, you're not going to go to the Arndale shopping centre on a Saturday afternoon and come out having, you know, formed a band, you know, found your manager, found the person who's going to do your video, found a journalist who's going to write about you in the, you know, online. You know, you're not, but you might if you go to a club.
Yeah, totally, yeah.
A venue, and you know, so those, I don't think it's appreciated at all by.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned earlier about you know, kind of finding your tribe, which is, you know, a great way of putting it. I completely agree. There's a film, I think it's called I think it's called Spray Wars, I think. But it's filmed in New York, and it's basically about kind of, you know, groups of people that would sort of come together and you know, graffiti. The guys that used to sort of graffiti the, you know, the tube sort of carriages in New York, the subway carriages in New York, and it's just a sort of fantastic image of people kind of coming together with a real kind of freedom of expression, and how that was gnawed away at. You know, eventually sort of by the authorities to kind of like take it away, you know, and it declines. Yeah.
I mean, you know, sometimes, I mean, the narrative is that, you know, these opportunities arrive for different generations in different cities. That little bit of space, uncontrolled, whether it's a venue or whether it's something else, a moment in time where people who want to can express themselves in an interesting and intriguing way, and then that opportunity disappears. You know, and it keeps on happening. And I think the one, despite, you know, where we are now, the one thing when you read Life After Dark is you realise that nightlife is part of our DNA.
Yeah.
And more than that, coming together in small groups and creating ad hoc communities, you know, temporary autonomous spaces. That's what we do, because we are communal and we are social, and we love that. And actually, through the history of nightclubs and music venues, that hasn't always been easy to do. That hasn't stopped people doing it. Mainly because the people who are most hungry for that are those reckless young people that I spoke about before. You know, will take a risk. You know, and I think when you get to 59, which is how old I am now, you can't set yourself up as being you know, the last generation that did anything. You know, the thing is that great cultural activity will be happening all around, and it will be underground in a different way, and it will be in a space that's a little bit different, and the music won't be the same, and you know, but it'll be there and it'll be happening. You know, and because I just know that, you know, there wasn't a 59-year-old in the whole world who knew what we were doing at the Man Alive when I was playing 23 Skidoo records. No, there wasn't. There was nobody. And if some venerable older geezer from the music scene 30, 40 years previously had been asked for their opinion on what the kids were doing, it would have been pretty negative, I think.
Do you think that's still the same?
Yeah, I think so. I don't. I don't know. I just think that people will find a way. You know, in a way, I mean, in a way, it's harder when you get older. I have this kind of ongoing thing in my head about how whatever you're doing, it's not, you don't even have to be a creative person, I don't think. You just have to grow up, and become an adult. And, you're making decisions and you're making choices and you're making the life that you think you want. And what is difficult is when you're doing that and then suddenly you you realize that the world that you created around you that you thought was the world you wanted is a cage. And that actually you've made all these decisions with the best intentions, but you might get to a point in your life where you're like, hang on a minute, I know I've gained a lot, I know I've achieved a lot, but there's some stuff missing. The stuff is missing and it's outside of the cage. And I need to feel stuff that I can't feel in this world that I've created.
Is that how you keep your creativity going? You're sort of thinking that way.
I don't. Yeah, I think I keep my creativity going by just keep on listening to that inner me saying, it doesn't matter if you clear the dance floor, because you know how to bring it back. It doesn't matter if there's a load of people who have, followed your music career and associate me with, New Order or whatever they associate me with, suddenly turning up with a book about Sylvia Plath. That's who I am, and why not? Who writes the rules about what kind of a person you are?
Yeah,
you do, not somebody else. You do, and I just feel grateful for the opportunities people have given me, but also, I do pat myself on the back occasionally, also saying, well, you made and took some great opportunities, you were prepared to do what you needed to do to feel like you were expressing who you are. And out of that, there becomes also responsibility for me to give opportunities to the next people, and I do kind of feel like that whole looking back now on all the stuff that I've done, I think the key thing that I've realized is that I'm part of a much bigger project. It's not about my little projects. It's about how my little projects have contributed to a much bigger project, which is to increase human happiness and connectedness.
Yeah.
And that's what it's about. And there's lots of us who are contributing to that in lots of different ways. And actually, the more idiosyncratic we are, the more valuable our contribution, because it's us. And so when you can kind of slightly, in a way, take your ego away, realize that realize that bigger project, and therefore you realize your responsibility to other people and to the next generation or the generation after that. Actually, you then feel a lot freer.
I completely agree. So that's a great way to look at it. I love that. That's a very, kind of selfless way of sort of approaching it. It's like you've got this kind of rich history and you've had these amazing opportunities, and here's how I can help. Those that are coming through, those that are facing the same kind of challenges, maybe different challenges to what I faced. I can help you, and
you get
you evolve.
Where if you're lucky, when you get up, I'm weighing up the pros and cons of being 59, but one of them is that if you are lucky, as I feel like I am, I don't feel like I have anything left to prove.
Yeah,
I don't know if I ever felt that anyway, but I definitely don't feel that now.
Yeah,
I feel, thank God for that. Especially I think men find it very difficult. There's that line, isn't it, from the Tennessee Williams play, I could have been a contender. You know,
Yeah.
and men taking into their middle age and old age that idea that they haven't made their mark and that they messed up, and that they become angry.
Almost an obsession with legacy.
Yeah, and you know, I missed out.
Yeah.
And there's some part of my, you know, my alpha maleness has not stamped my identity on the world.
Yeah.
And you know, and often people are too hard on themselves about that. They probably have, do you know what I mean? And sometimes they're just measuring themselves against a delusion instead of against what's actually real and possible. You know, and you end up, you know, you do end up where you are. And I kind of feel like that's one of the freedoms of being, as I say, one of the freedoms of being slightly older is that, you first of all, you kind of realize that your ego stopped playing that much of a part in what you do. And you have what you do, and you do it, and you just carry on doing it as well as you can, and just valuing the relationships that communication and that artistic expression is giving you, really. You know, and also just understanding, you know, when I get an email from people, not, you know, email from a person saying, you know, and there's lots of versions, but they might say, oh, you know, I'm getting married soon, or, you know, it's my 40th or my 50th or whatever. And I feel like I've grown up listening to your music, buying your books, coming to your events. It would just be a dream come true if you would come and DJ at this event. You know, and I'm at that, to be honest, that kind of emotional blackmail always works. But you know, and I don't take that for granted, that kind of response for granted. I'm like, actually, you're doing me a massive favor by sending me an email like that, and I would be quite happy to do you a supposed massive favor by coming and DJing for a couple of hours on your special day, you know, at a considerable cost to you. But you know, that is, it's pretty remarkable to be, you know, in that situation. And like I say, I don't take it for granted. I really appreciate it.
Brilliant. Well, Dave, honestly, I could talk all day. I think it's fascinating listening to you every time, and thanks very much for, you know, I think we've ended on an extremely sort of positive and, you know, on a note that's looking to the future and, you know, kind of next generation and you sort of continuing to help them. So thanks so much, Dave. It's been a real pleasure.
We've done a whole hour.
We've done a whole hour.
Thank you.
Cheers, Dave. Thanks very much.
Thanks for listening to the show, and I really hope that you enjoyed it and that you'll tune in for the next episode. In the meantime, it would be really awesome if you could rate and review the show, and also share it with any friends who you think might enjoy it.